Viking dawn rituals began before the first light appeared over the fjords and mountains of Scandinavia, when warriors and farmers alike prepared for another day of survival in the harsh northern climate. The sound of wind through pine, forests and waves against rocky shores provided a constant backdrop to Viking morning routines that had remained unchanged for generations of Norse communities. Viking warriors woke naturally with the changing light of the seasons. Their internal rhythms adapted to the extreme variations in daylight that characterized northern European latitudes. During summer months, dawn came early with nearly continuous daylight, while winter mornings remained dark until late in the morning, requiring Vikings to adapt their schedules accordingly. Ancient Viking homes were designed to maximize warmth and protection from severe weather conditions, with thick walls made of stone, wood, and turf that provided insulation against freezing temperatures and howling winds. The central hearth remained burning throughout the night, tended by rotating family members who ensured that flames never died completely. Viking morning fire preparation involved carefully adding dried wood, peat, and other combustible materials to the overnight embers, gradually building the flames that would provide heat, light, and cooking capability for the day's activities. Fire was considered sacred in Norse culture and represented the power of the gods to provide life and protection. Ancient Viking clothing reflected both practical needs and social status, with garments made from wool, linen, and animal skins that provided protection against cold, wet conditions while allowing freedom of movement for work and combat. Morning dressing routines involved layering multiple garments to maintain body heat throughout the day. Viking men typically wore woolen tunics, linen undergarments, woolen trousers, and leather shoes or boots that provided protection and warmth during outdoor activities. Wealthy Vikings displayed their status through finer fabrics, intricate embroidery, and imported materials that demonstrated their success in trade or warfare. Ancient Viking women dressed in long woolen dresses, linen undergarments, and apron-like garments called hangerocks that were fastened with ornate brooches made of bronze, silver, or gold. These brooches served both functional and decorative purposes while indicating the woman's social position and family. Wealth. Viking personal hygiene practices were surprisingly sophisticated and included daily washing with soap made from animal fat and ash, regular grooming of hair and beards, and attention to dental care using twigs and other natural materials. Vikings took pride in their appearance and considered cleanliness important for both practical and social reasons. Ancient Viking breakfast preparation typically involved simple foods that could be quickly prepared and consumed before beginning the day's work or travel. Common breakfast items included porridge made from barley or oats, dried fish, preserved meat, and fermented dairy products that provided necessary nutrition and energy. Viking morning prayers and rituals honored the Norse gods who governed different aspects of daily life, with particular attention paid to Odin the Allfather, Thor the Thunder God, and Freyr, who controlled fertility and prosperity. These spiritual practices helped Vikings feel connected to divine forces that could influence their success and survival. Ancient Viking weapon maintenance formed an essential part of morning routines for warriors and farmers alike, as weapons served both military and practical purposes in Viking society. Swords, axes, spears, and shields required daily attention to maintain their effectiveness and prevent damage from moisture and use. Viking tool preparation involved sharpening blades, checking handles and bindings, and ensuring that all equipment was ready for the day's activities, whether farming, crafting, trading, or raiding. Well-maintained tools were essential for survival and success in the challenging northern environment. Ancient Viking family coordination required careful planning and communication to ensure that all members understood their responsibilities and tasks for the day. Viking households functioned as economic units where every person contributed according to their abilities and social role. Viking morning discussions covered topics ranging from weather conditions and seasonal changes to planned activities and potential threats that might affect the community. Information sharing was crucial for survival in a world where conditions could change rapidly and unexpectedly. Ancient Viking livestock care began at dawn when animals needed to be fed, watered, and checked for health problems that could threaten valuable resources. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses provided food, materials, and transportation that were essential for Viking survival and prosperity. Viking seasonal preparations varied dramatically depending on the time of year and weather conditions, with different morning routines required for farming season, raiding season, winter survival, and festival periods. Vikings understood the importance of adapting their activities to natural cycles and environmental conditions. Ancient Viking community coordination involved communication between neighboring farms and settlements to share information about weather, threats, opportunities, and mutual assistance needs. Viking society depended on cooperation and reciprocity for survival in challenging conditions. Viking morning rituals concluded with final preparations for departure, whether for farming, crafting, trading, or raiding activities that would occupy the remainder of the day. These preparations included gathering tools, weapons, food, and other necessary supplies, while ensuring that homes and families were properly secured. Ancient Viking departure ceremonies might include prayers for protection and success, farewells to family members, and coordination with companions who would share the day's activities and challenges. Vikings understood that each departure might be permanent in a world filled with natural and human dangers. Viking morning rhythms reflected thousands of years of adaptation to Northern European environments and created sustainable patterns of daily life that enabled Norse communities to thrive despite harsh conditions and constant challenges. These routines provided structure and stability in an uncertain world. Viking longship construction represented one of the most advanced shipbuilding technologies in the medieval world and enabled Norse explorers to travel vast distances across oceans and up rivers that were inaccessible to other vessels. The process of building these magnificent ships required specialized knowledge, skilled craftsmanship, and community cooperation that could take months or years to complete. Viking shipwrights began longship construction by selecting appropriate trees that possessed the strength, flexibility, and size needed for different components of the vessel. Oak was preferred for the hull and structural elements due to its durability and resistance to water damage, while pine and other softwoods were used for masts, oars, and interior fittings. Ancient Viking tree selection involved careful evaluation of timber quality, grain patterns, and natural curves that could be incorporated into ship design without requiring extensive modification. Experienced shipbuilders could identify trees that would provide specific components such as curved ribs, straight planks, or bent stems that formed the distinctive Longship profile. Viking wood preparation required months of seasoning and treatment to ensure the timber would remain stable and watertight under the stresses of ocean travel. Green wood was gradually dried using controlled methods that prevented cracking and warping while maintaining the strength. Characteristics needed for shipbuilding. Ancient Viking keel construction formed the foundation of Longship design and determined the vessel's overall dimensions, sailing characteristics, and structural integrity. The keel was typically made from a single massive oak timber that could extend 30 meters or more in length and provide the backbone for the entire ship structure. Viking hull construction used overlapping planks called strakes that were fastened together with iron rivets and sealed with wool, moss, or tar to create watertight joints. This clinker-built construction method provided flexibility and strength while allowing the ship to bend and flex with wave action without breaking apart. Ancient Viking riveting techniques required skilled metalworkers who could heat iron rods to proper temperatures, shape them into rivets, and install them through precisely drilled holes in overlapping planks. Each rivet had to be perfectly fitted and sealed to prevent water infiltration that could sink the vessel. Viking frame installation involved shaping curved ribs that provided internal structure and determined the ship's cross-sectional shape. These frames were carefully fitted to the hull planking and secured with wooden pegs and lashings that distributed stress throughout the entire structure. Ancient Viking decking systems provided working surfaces for crew members while allowing access to storage areas and rowing benches. Deck planks were removable to permit cargo loading and bilge maintenance, and could be quickly rearranged to accommodate different types of voyages and activities. Viking mast installation required sophisticated engineering to support the enormous stresses generated by large square sails in strong winds. The mast step was carved directly into the keel structure, while the mast partner and rigging attachment points were reinforced with additional timber and iron fittings. Ancient Viking sail making utilized wool or linen fabrics that were woven, cut, and sewn into large rectangular sails capable of propelling fully loaded longships at impressive speeds. Sail design incorporated reinforcement strips, rope borders, and attachment points that could withstand the tremendous forces generated by ocean winds. Viking rigging systems included sophisticated arrangements of ropes, pulleys, and hardware that allowed crews to raise, lower, and adjust sails according to wind conditions and navigational requirements. Rigging maintenance was an ongoing responsibility that required constant attention to prevent dangerous failures during voyages. Ancient Viking oar systems provided backup propulsion when winds were unfavorable and enabled precise maneuvering in harbors, rivers, and coastal waters. Longships typically carried 15 to 30 pairs of oars that could be operated by crew members, sitting on sea chests that doubled as storage containers. Viking rowing techniques maximized efficiency and endurance during long voyages by coordinating stroke timing, rhythm, and power distribution among all crew members. Experienced crews could maintain steady rowing speeds for hours while navigating challenging conditions and maintaining ship control. Ancient Viking navigation methods combined astronomical observations, environmental indicators, and accumulated knowledge of currents, winds, and landmarks to guide longships across vast distances of open ocean. Viking navigators could determine direction, estimate position, and predict weather changes using traditional techniques passed down through generations. Viking compass alternatives included sun compasses, crystal sunstones, and careful observation of bird flight patterns, wave characteristics, and watercolor changes that indicated proximity to land or specific geographic features. These natural navigation aids enabled Vikings to explore previously unknown territories with remarkable accuracy. Ancient Viking ship launching ceremonies marked the completion of construction projects and invoked divine protection for vessels and crews who would face dangerous conditions during their voyages. These rituals included sacrificial offerings, prayers to sea gods, and community celebrations that honored the craftsmen and blessed the ship. Viking shipyard organization required coordination between multiple specialists, including woodworkers, metalworkers, rope makers, sail makers, and laborers who contributed different skills to the construction process. Large shipbuilding projects involved entire communities and represented significant investments of time, materials, and expertise. Ancient Viking maintenance schedules ensured that longships remained seaworthy throughout their operational lives by addressing wear, damage, and deterioration that resulted from exposure to saltwater, weather, and heavy use. Regular maintenance prevented catastrophic failures that could result in loss of ship, cargo, and crew. Viking winter storage involved hauling longships onto beaches or into specially constructed sheds where they could be protected from ice, storms, and other hazards that threatened vessels left in water during frozen months. Proper storage techniques preserved ships for decades of reliable service. Ancient Viking crew training prepared sailors for the physical and mental challenges of ocean voyages by teaching rowing techniques, sail handling, navigation skills, and emergency procedures. Experienced crews were essential for successful voyages and survival in dangerous conditions. Viking sailing seasons were carefully planned to take advantage of favorable weather conditions while avoiding storms, ice, and other hazards that made ocean travel extremely dangerous. Most longship voyages occurred during summer months when daylight was extended and weather patterns were relatively predictable. Viking farming practices formed the foundation of Norse society and provided the agricultural surplus that supported trade, exploration, and military activities throughout Scandinavia and beyond. Despite popular images of Vikings as primarily raiders and warriors, the vast majority of Norse people were farmers who worked the land using techniques adapted to Northern European climate and soil conditions. Viking agricultural seasons followed natural cycles that determined planting, growing, harvesting, and storage activities throughout the year. The short growing season in northern latitudes required careful timing and intensive labor. During summer months, when crops had to be planted, tended, and harvested before winter frost destroyed agricultural production. Ancient Viking crop selection focused on hardy varieties that could survive in cool, wet conditions while providing essential nutrition for both humans and livestock. Barley was the primary grain crop because it matured quickly and tolerated poor soil conditions better than wheat, which was grown only in the most favorable locations. Viking soil preparation involved clearing forests, removing stones, and creating drainage systems that prevented waterlogging in fields prone to excessive moisture. This labor-intensive process often required several years to transform wild land into productive, agricultural areas suitable for cultivation. Ancient Viking plowing utilized simple wooden plows, pulled by oxen or horses, that broke up soil and created furrows for seed planting. These primitive implements were adequate for light soils, but struggled with heavy clay or rocky ground that characterized much of the Scandinavian landscape. Viking seed selection preserved the best grains from each harvest for planting in the following year, ensuring that crop varieties remained adapted to local growing conditions. Farmers carefully stored seed, grain in dry conditions to prevent sprouting or deterioration that would reduce germination rates. Ancient Viking fertilization methods included spreading animal manure, composted organic matter, and ash from wood fires to improve soil fertility and increase crop yields. These natural fertilizers provided essential nutrients while improving soil structure and water retention capabilities. Viking weeding and cultivation required constant attention during growing seasons to prevent wild plants from competing with crops for nutrients, water, and sunlight. Hand weeding and simple cultivation tools were used to maintain clean fields and maximize agricultural productivity. Ancient Viking harvesting involved cutting grain crops with sickles and scythes when plants reached optimal maturity, then gathering and bundling stalks for drying and threshing. Timing was critical because crops had to be harvested before autumn rains and frost damaged the grain quality. Viking threshing separated grain from stalks using flails and beating sticks that knocked seeds from dried plant material. This labor-intensive process was often performed by entire families working together to process the harvest before winter storage became necessary. Ancient Viking grain storage utilized specially constructed buildings and containers that protected harvested crops from moisture, pests, and theft. Proper storage techniques were essential for survival during long winter months when fresh food was unavailable. Viking livestock management included caring for cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses that provided food, materials, and labor for agricultural and household activities. Animals were essential components of Viking farming systems and required daily attention throughout the year. Ancient Viking cattle served multiple purposes, including milk production, meat, leather, and draft power for plowing and transportation. Cattle were valuable assets that represented wealth and status within Viking communities, and their care required significant knowledge and resources. Viking sheep provided wool for clothing and textiles, milk for dairy products, and meat for food during winter months. Sheep were well adapted to northern climates and could graze on marginal land that was unsuitable for crop production. Ancient Viking goat herding utilized animals that could browse on shrubs and weeds while providing milk, meat, and hides for various household uses. Goats were particularly valuable in mountainous areas where other livestock could not survive harsh conditions. Viking pig farming involved raising animals that converted agricultural waste and forest products into valuable protein sources. Pigs were fed kitchen scraps, acorns, and other materials that would otherwise be wasted, making them efficient converters of marginal resources. Ancient Viking horse breeding produced animals that served as transportation, draft power, and military mounts essential for Viking mobility and warfare. Horses were expensive to maintain, but provided capabilities that no other animals could match. Viking pasture management included rotating, grazing areas to prevent overuse, and maintaining meadows that provided hay for winter feeding. Proper pasture care ensured that livestock remained healthy and productive throughout the year. Ancient Viking dairy production involved milking cows, sheep, and goats to provide fresh milk and processed dairy products such as cheese, butter, and fermented drinks. Dairy products were important protein sources and could be preserved for extended periods. Viking meat preservation utilized smoking, salting, and drying techniques that prevented spoilage and provided protein sources during winter months when fresh meat was unavailable. Preserved meat was essential for survival and could be stored for extended periods. Ancient Viking wool processing involved shearing sheep, cleaning fleeces, spinning wool into thread, and weaving textiles for clothing and household use. Wool production was primarily women's work and provided essential materials for family survival. Viking leather production required skinning animals, treating hides with various substances, and processing materials into leather goods including clothing, containers, and equipment. Leather was an essential material that served numerous purposes in Viking society. Ancient Viking farm organization coordinated the activities of family members and laborers to ensure that all necessary tasks were completed efficiently and effectively. Viking farms operated as self-sufficient economic units that produced most necessities for family survival. Viking seasonal labor patterns concentrated intensive work during summer months when crops required planting, cultivation, and harvesting, while winter months involved maintenance, repair, and indoor activities. Labor distribution reflected the demands of northern agricultural cycles. Ancient Viking tool maintenance included caring for plows, harrows, sickles, scythes, and other implements that were essential for successful farming. Proper tool care ensured that equipment remained functional and effective throughout demanding agricultural seasons. Viking farm planning involved decisions about crop rotation, field preparation, livestock breeding, and resource allocation that affected long-term productivity and sustainability. Successful farming required careful planning and adaptation to changing conditions and opportunities. Viking food preparation and feasting represented one of the most important social activities in Norse culture and provided opportunities for communities to gather, celebrate, and strengthen bonds while sharing the bounty of harvests, hunts, and raids. The preparation and consumption of food followed, traditions that had been passed down through generations and reflected both practical necessities and cultural values. Viking daily meals typically consisted of two main eating periods, with breakfast in the morning and a larger evening meal that brought families together after the day's work. The morning meal was simple and quick to prepare, while the evening feast could involve hours of preparation and elaborate presentations when special occasions were celebrated. Ancient Viking bread making formed the foundation of Norse diet and required daily attention to ensure that families had adequate supplies of this essential food. Bread was made from barley, oats, or rye flour mixed with water and sometimes supplemented with seeds, nuts, or dried fruits to add flavor and nutrition. Viking grinding techniques used hand-powered rotary querns made of stone that crushed grain into flour through repetitive circular motions. This labor-intensive process was typically performed by women and required significant time and effort to produce enough flour for daily bread. Requirements. Ancient Viking dough preparation involved mixing flour with water, salt, and sometimes leaven or starter cultures that caused the bread to rise and develop complex flavors. The consistency and hydration of dough had to be carefully controlled to produce bread with the desired texture and keeping qualities. Viking baking methods utilized various heating sources, including flat stones placed near fires, clay ovens built into walls or outdoor structures, and iron pans that could be heated directly over flames. Each method produced bread with different characteristics and required specific techniques to achieve good results. Ancient Viking porridge preparation provided a warm, filling meal that could be easily adjusted to use whatever grains, dairy products, and flavoring ingredients were available. Porridge was cooked in iron cauldrons suspended over fires and stirred frequently to prevent burning. Viking dairy processing transformed fresh milk from cows, sheep, and goats into products that could be preserved and consumed throughout the year. Butter, cheese, and fermented dairy drinks, like skyr, provided essential fats and proteins while utilizing milk that would otherwise spoil. Quickly. Ancient Viking butter making involved churning cream in wooden vessels until fat globules separated from liquid buttermilk. The resulting butter could be salted and packed into containers for long-term storage, providing a valuable source of calories during winter months. Viking cheese production required heating milk, adding rennet or acid to cause coagulation, separating curds from whey, and pressing the solid curds into forms that could be aged and stored. Cheese making utilized surplus milk and created concentrated nutrition that remained edible for extended periods. Ancient Viking meat preparation began with slaughtering livestock or processing game animals that had been hunted in forests and mountains surrounding Viking settlements. Meat was a valued food source that was carefully preserved and allocated according to social hierarchy and special occasions. Viking smoking techniques preserved meat by exposing it to wood smoke in specially constructed smokehouses where temperature and humidity could be controlled to prevent spoilage while imparting distinctive flavors. Smoked meat remained edible for months when properly prepared and stored. Ancient Viking salting methods utilized precious salt obtained through trade or evaporation of seawater to preserve meat and fish through osmotic dehydration that prevented bacterial growth. Salt preservation was expensive but highly effective for long-term food storage. Viking fish processing provided essential protein and was particularly important in coastal communities where marine resources were readily available. Fish could be dried, smoked, salted, or fermented to create products that sustained Viking populations through harsh winters. Ancient Viking dried fish production involved cleaning, splitting, and air-drying fish on outdoor racks where cold temperatures and low humidity prevented spoilage while removing moisture. Dried fish became rock-hard, but could be rehydrated and consumed months after processing. Viking vegetable preservation utilized root cellars, sand storage, and fermentation techniques to extend the availability of vegetables beyond harvest seasons. Turnips, cabbage, onions, and other vegetables provided essential vitamins and variety to otherwise monotonous winter diets. Ancient Viking fermentation processes created preserved foods including sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, and fermented fish products that not only lasted longer but also developed complex flavors and increased nutritional value through bacterial action. Viking feast preparation for special occasions required days of advance work to prepare elaborate meals that demonstrated wealth, generosity, and social status. Feasts celebrated victories, religious festivals, weddings, and other significant events that brought communities together. Ancient Viking mead production fermented honey with water and sometimes added herbs or fruits to create alcoholic beverages that were highly valued for celebrations and religious ceremonies. Mead making required skill and patience to achieve the desired sweetness, strength, and flavor characteristics. Viking ale brewing utilized malted barley, water, and various herbs to produce fermented beverages that were consumed daily by all members of society. Brewing was typically women's work and required knowledge of fermentation, processes, and flavor balancing. Ancient Viking feast serving customs followed hierarchical patterns that reflected social status and honor systems within Norse communities. The most important guests received choice portions and preferential seating arrangements that acknowledged their position and achievements. Viking drinking customs involved elaborate toasting rituals, competitive drinking challenges, and ceremonial vessels that enhanced the social significance of alcohol consumption during feasts. Drinking horns, decorated cups, and shared vessels passed among guests to strengthen social bonds. Ancient Viking table manners emphasized generosity, sharing, and respect for hosts who provided food and hospitality. Guests were expected to participate enthusiastically in feasting, while observing proper behavior that honored their hosts and maintained social harmony. Viking storytelling during feasts preserved oral traditions, historical accounts, and cultural values through narratives that entertained guests while transmitting knowledge across generations. Skilled storytellers were highly valued and could influence reputations through their tales. Viking feast cleanup involved distributing leftovers, cleaning vessels and serving areas, and storing unused food to prevent waste. The communal nature of feasting meant that many hands shared the work of preparation and cleanup. Viking blacksmithing and metalworking represented some of the most prestigious and essential crafts in Norse society and produced the tools, household items, and equipment that enabled Viking communities to thrive in challenging northern environments. Blacksmiths held respected positions in their communities and possessed specialized knowledge that was carefully guarded and passed down through apprenticeship. Viking forge construction required building structures that could contain intense heat while providing adequate ventilation and workspace for metalworking activities. Forges were typically built with stone or clay hearths, bellows systems for air supply, and nearby water sources for quenching hot metal. Ancient Viking charcoal production provided the high-temperature fuel needed for metalworking by slowly burning wood in oxygen-limited conditions that converted timber into carbon-rich fuel. Charcoal production was a skilled craft that required careful control of burning conditions to produce quality fuel. Viking bellows operation used leather bags with one-way valves that forced air into forge fires when operated by hand or foot pumps. The increased oxygen flow raised temperatures high enough to melt and forge various metals including iron, bronze, and precious metals. Ancient Viking iron smelting extracted usable metal from ore through heating processes that separated iron from rocky material and impurities. Smelting required knowledge of ore quality, temperature control, and chemical processes that transformed raw materials into workable metal. Viking bloom refinement involved repeatedly heating and hammering iron blooms to drive out impurities and create more homogeneous metal with better working properties. This labor-intensive process gradually improved metal quality through mechanical manipulation and controlled heating. Ancient Viking steel production created stronger, more durable metal by carefully controlling carbon content through repeated heating, folding, and hammering of iron. The resulting steel could hold sharper edges and withstand greater stresses than pure iron. Viking forging techniques shaped heated metal through controlled hammer blows on anvils that gradually transformed raw materials into finished products. Skilled blacksmiths could forge complex shapes while maintaining proper metal grain structure and avoiding damaging cracks or weaknesses. Ancient Viking tool production created essential implements for farming, woodworking, textile production, and other daily activities that sustained Viking communities. Tools had to be durable, functional, and properly designed for specific tasks while remaining affordable for common people. Viking agricultural tool making produced plowshares, sickles, scythes, and other implements that enabled efficient food production in northern climates. These tools required careful design to balance strength, sharpness, and weight for prolonged use in demanding conditions. Ancient Viking woodworking tool production created axes, adzes, chisels, and saws that enabled sophisticated carpentry and shipbuilding activities. Woodworking tools required extremely sharp edges and proper blade geometry to cut efficiently through various wood types. Viking nail and fastener production supplied essential hardware for construction, shipbuilding, and equipment assembly. Making consistent, reliable fasteners required skill and attention to detail to ensure proper size, strength, and corrosion resistance. Ancient Viking household item production created cooking vessels, knives, scissors, needles, and numerous other items that were essential for daily life. These products demonstrated the blacksmith's versatility and served practical needs while sometimes incorporating decorative elements. Viking decorative metalwork incorporated intricate patterns, animal motifs, and geometric designs into functional objects that displayed artistic skill and cultural symbolism. Decorated items served as status symbols and demonstrated the blacksmith's mastery of both technical and artistic aspects of the craft. Ancient Viking bronze casting utilized lost wax and sand casting techniques to create complex, three-dimensional objects including jewelry, ceremonial items, and decorative fittings. Bronze work required different skills than iron forging and involved melting, pouring, and finishing processes. Viking precious metal working created jewelry, arm rings, and other ornamental objects from silver and gold that served as portable wealth, status symbols, and gifts that strengthened social relationships. Precious metal work required exceptional skill and access to expensive materials. Ancient Viking wire drawing produced fine metal strands that could be woven, twisted, or formed into decorative elements for jewelry and ornamental objects. Wire making required specialized tools and techniques to reduce metal thickness while maintaining strength and flexibility. Viking heat treatment processes included hardening, tempering, and annealing techniques that modified metal properties to achieve desired characteristics for different applications. Proper heat treatment was essential for producing durable, functional metal objects. Ancient Viking quenching methods rapidly cooled heated metal in water, oil, or other liquids to lock in specific crystalline structures that affected hardness, toughness, and other properties. Quenching required precise timing and temperature control to avoid cracking or warping. Viking grinding and sharpening utilized abrasive stones to create and maintain sharp edges on cutting tools. Proper grinding techniques produced edges with appropriate geometry for specific applications while removing damaged or worn material. Ancient Viking apprenticeship systems trained new blacksmiths through years of practical experience working alongside master craftsmen who shared knowledge of techniques, materials, and trade secrets. Apprentices gradually assumed more complex tasks as their skills developed. Viking tool maintenance represented an ongoing responsibility for blacksmiths who repaired damaged implements, resharpened worn edges, and modified existing tools to suit changing needs. Repair work provided steady income while building relationships with community members. Ancient Viking metal recycling salvaged valuable materials from broken or worn-out items and incorporated recycled metal into new products. The high value of metal meant that virtually nothing was wasted, and old items were carefully preserved for eventual reuse. Viking quality control ensured that finished products met standards for strength, durability, and functionality through testing, inspection, and adjustment of manufacturing processes. A blacksmith's reputation depended on producing reliable items that performed as expected. Ancient Viking workshop organization coordinated the activities of master blacksmiths, journeymen, apprentices, and support workers to maintain efficient production while preserving quality standards. Successful workshops required both technical skill and business management abilities. Viking military activities and defensive operations represented fundamental aspects of Norse culture that enabled territorial expansion, wealth acquisition, and protection of communities from external threats. A Viking reputation as fierce warriors was earned through generations of military experience and sophisticated tactical knowledge that made Norse forces formidable opponents throughout medieval Europe. Viking military training began in childhood when boys learned basic skills, including running, swimming, climbing, and handling simple equipment that would later support more advanced martial abilities. Physical conditioning and endurance development prepared young Vikings for the demanding nature of Norse combat. Ancient Viking combat techniques emphasized practical effectiveness over formal styles and incorporated grappling, striking, and techniques for various situations that warriors might encounter. Training focused on developing instinctive responses and maintaining effectiveness under stressful conditions. Viking shield usage formed the foundation of Norse defensive tactics and required understanding proper positioning, angling, and coordination with other shield bearers to create effective formations. Shield walls provided collective protection that was greater than the sum of individual defenses. Ancient Viking formation tactics organized warriors into coordinated units that could maintain cohesion during movement and combat while supporting each other against enemy attacks. The famous shield wall formation placed warriors side by side with overlapping shields that created nearly impenetrable barriers. Viking tactical planning considered terrain, weather, enemy capabilities, and available resources when organizing military operations. Successful commanders understood how to exploit advantages while minimizing vulnerabilities through careful preparation and flexible execution. Ancient Viking scouting practices gathered intelligence about enemy positions, strength, movements, and intentions through reconnaissance missions that provided information for tactical planning. Scouts needed to move quietly, observe carefully, and report accurately to support decision-making. Viking navigation skills enabled forces to travel long distances by sea and land while maintaining orientation and reaching intended destinations. Maritime navigation was particularly important for coordinating amphibious operations and maintaining supply lines. Ancient Viking surprise tactics utilized speed, deception, and unexpected approaches to catch enemies unprepared and maximize the shock effect of initial contact. Dawn attacks were particularly favored because they caught defenders still sleeping or just awakening. Viking river navigation allowed forces to penetrate deep into continental Europe using shallow draft longships that could travel up rivers where conventional vessels could not operate. River raids brought Viking forces to wealthy interior regions that had previously felt safe from seaboard attacks. Ancient Viking beach landings required coordinating simultaneous arrivals of multiple vessels to rapidly deploy forces before defenders could organize effective resistance. The shallow draft of longships enabled direct beach landings without requiring port facilities. Viking camp security established defensive perimeters, posted sentries, and organized response forces to protect encampments from surprise attacks during extended operations. Proper security measures prevented devastating losses to forces that might be caught unprepared. Ancient Viking logistics planning ensured that forces had adequate supplies of food, water, equipment, and other necessities for extended operations away from home bases. Supply management could determine the success or failure of military campaigns. Viking foraging techniques supplemented carried supplies by gathering food and resources from surrounding areas during military operations. Foraging parties required protection and coordination to prevent ambush while ensuring adequate supply acquisition. Ancient Viking siege tactics enabled Norse forces to capture fortified positions through combinations of assault, starvation, and psychological pressure. Sieges required patience, logistics, and specialized equipment that not all Viking forces possessed. Viking naval tactics utilized the speed and maneuverability of longships to engage or avoid enemy vessels according to tactical advantage. Naval combat could involve ramming, boarding, and projectile exchanges depending on circumstances and capabilities. Ancient Viking defensive fortifications protected settlements from attack through combinations of natural terrain features, constructed barriers, and organized defense plans. Fortification design reflected available resources and expected threat levels. Viking early warning systems used lookouts, signal fires, and messenger networks to alert communities about approaching threats and allow time for defensive preparations. Early warning could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. Ancient Viking alliance networks created mutual defense arrangements between communities that could provide reinforcements and support during emergencies. These alliances required careful negotiation and maintenance through gift-giving, marriages, and regular communication. Viking training exercises prepared forces for combat through practice sessions that developed individual skills and unit coordination. Regular training maintained readiness and identified areas needing improvement before actual combat-tested capabilities. Ancient Viking equipment maintenance ensured that gear remained in good condition through regular inspection, repair, and replacement of worn or damaged items. Proper maintenance prevented equipment failures during critical moments. Viking medical care treated injuries through combinations of practical first aid, herbal remedies, and surgical interventions that reflected accumulated knowledge of human anatomy and healing processes. Field medicine had to work with limited resources and challenging conditions. Ancient Viking wound treatment cleaned injuries, controlled bleeding, and prevented infection through applications of various substances, including honey, moss, and plant extracts that had proven effectiveness. Proper wound care significantly improved survival rates. Viking recovery periods allowed injured warriors to heal and regain strength before returning to active duty. Communities supported recovering warriors through provisions and care that enabled full recovery when possible. Ancient Viking psychological preparation developed mental resilience and courage through cultural values that emphasized honor, duty, and reputation. Norse religion and mythology provided frameworks for understanding danger and death that supported warrior effectiveness. Viking honor codes governed behavior and created social pressures that encouraged brave actions while discouraging cowardice or betrayal. Honor and reputation were considered more important than life itself in Viking warrior culture. Viking religious practices formed the foundation of Norse cultural identity and provided frameworks for understanding the natural world, human existence, and the relationship between mortals and divine forces. Norse religion was polytheistic and featured a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses who governed different aspects of life and required proper veneration through rituals, sacrifices, and observances. Viking cosmology described the universe as consisting of 9 worlds connected by the world tree Yggdrasil, with each realm inhabited by different beings including gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and humans. This cosmological structure influenced Norse understanding of existence and guided religious practices throughout Viking territories. Ancient Viking primary deities included Odin the Allfather, who ruled Asgard and possessed wisdom and magic, Thor the thunder god, who protected humanity with his mighty hammer, and Freyr and Freya, who governed fertility and prosperity. Each deity had specific domains and received worship appropriate to their powers and responsibilities. Viking temple construction created sacred spaces where communities gathered for religious ceremonies and maintained connections with divine forces. Temples were typically wooden structures with carved posts, decorated interiors, and designated areas for offerings and ritual activities. Ancient Viking sacred groves provided natural settings for religious observances in outdoor locations where ancient trees, springs, or rock formations held spiritual significance. Grove ceremonies connected worshippers directly with natural forces and ancestral spirits that inhabited these sacred spaces. Viking sacrifice rituals offered animals, food, precious objects, and occasionally humans to gods in exchange for divine favor, protection, and prosperity. Sacrifices were performed according to specific protocols and timing that maximized their effectiveness and honored proper relationships between mortals and deities. Ancient Viking animal sacrifice typically involved horses, cattle, pigs, or other livestock that were ritually killed and their blood collected for sprinkling on altars, worshippers, and sacred objects. Sacrificed animals were then butchered and consumed in communal feasts that shared divine blessings among participants. Viking blot ceremonies represented the most important religious observances and occurred at specific times throughout the year to mark seasonal changes and honor particular deities. Blot ceremonies combined sacrifice, feasting, and ritual drinking in elaborate events that strengthened community bonds while maintaining proper divine relationships. Ancient Viking seasonal festivals celebrated key agricultural and astronomical events, including winter solstice, spring planting, midsummer, and autumn harvest. These festivals aligned human activities with natural cycles and ensured continued divine support for community prosperity. Viking priesthood functions were typically performed by community leaders, including chieftains and wealthy landowners who possessed the status and resources necessary to conduct proper ceremonies. Priestly duties involved maintaining sacred spaces, performing sacrifices, and interpreting divine signs and omens. Ancient Viking cider magic represented a specialized form of Norse spirituality that involved trance states, prophecy, and manipulation of fate through ritual practices. Cider practitioners, often women called Volvas, possessed knowledge of herb lore, chanting, and ceremonial techniques that enabled communication with spirits and divine forces. Viking rune casting used carved symbols to divine future events, seek guidance from gods, and perform magical operations. Runes possessed both practical functions as written characters and mystical significance as channels for supernatural power. Ancient Viking amulet wearing provided personal protection and divine favor through small objects inscribed with runes shaped like sacred symbols or containing materials with magical properties. Common amulets included Thor's hammers, which offered protection and strength to wearers. Viking oath-taking invoked divine witnesses to sworn promises and created sacred obligations that carried severe supernatural consequences for violations. Oaths were taken on sacred rings, weapons, or other objects that connected human promises with divine authority. Ancient Viking funeral practices reflected beliefs about afterlife destinations and proper treatment of the dead to ensure their successful transition to other realms. Funeral customs varied according to social status, regional traditions, and specific circumstances of death. Viking burial methods included both inhumation and cremation, depending on local customs and available resources. Bodies or cremated remains were placed in graves with personal possessions, tools, and sometimes vehicles that would serve the deceased in the afterlife. Ancient Viking grave goods demonstrated social status and provided deceased individuals with items they would need in the afterlife, including clothing, jewelry, tools, food, and drink. Wealthy burials contained elaborate goods including ships, horses, and enslaved individuals sacrificed to serve their masters. Viking ship burials represented the most elaborate funeral practices and involved placing deceased individuals in vessels that were either buried under mounds or burned in spectacular cremation ceremonies. Ship burials symbolized the journey to the afterlife and displayed enormous wealth and status. Ancient Viking memorial stones marked burial sites and commemorated deceased individuals through carved inscriptions and artistic designs. Runestones provided lasting records of names, deeds, and relationships that preserved memories across generations. Viking ancestor veneration maintained connections with deceased family members who could provide guidance, protection, and blessings from their positions in the afterlife. Ancestors received offerings and prayers that acknowledged their continued importance to living descendants. Ancient Viking afterlife beliefs described multiple possible destinations for the dead, including Valhalla for warriors who died in combat, Folkvanger for those chosen by Freya, and Hell for those who died of natural causes. Each destination had different characteristics and requirements for admission. Viking prophecy interpretation sought to understand divine will and future events through signs, omens, dreams, and prophetic utterances. Skilled interpreters could discern meaning in natural phenomena, can provide guidance for important decisions. Ancient Viking curse practices invoked supernatural forces to harm enemies. Through ritual formulas, carved runes, and ceremonial actions, curses were taken seriously and could have devastating psychological effects, even if supernatural mechanisms remained uncertain. Viking protective magic employed various techniques, including ritual objects, spoken formulas, and symbolic actions to defend against supernatural threats and human enemies. Protective practices reflected deep beliefs in unseen forces that could be manipulated through proper knowledge. Ancient Viking healing rituals combined practical medical treatments with religious ceremonies that invoked divine assistance for recovery from illness and injury. Healing practices acknowledged both physical and spiritual dimensions of health and disease. Viking weather magic attempted to influence atmospheric conditions through sacrifices, incantations, and ritual actions that appealed to gods and spirits who controlled winds, rain, and temperature. Weather manipulation was particularly important for seafaring communities dependent on favorable sailing conditions. Ancient Viking agricultural rituals ensured successful crops through ceremonies that honored fertility deities, maintained proper relationships with land spirits. Planting and harvest times were marked with special observances that connected human labor with divine blessings. Viking Christianity conversion gradually transformed Norse religious practices beginning in the late Viking age as Christian missionaries and political pressures encouraged abandonment of traditional beliefs. Conversion was often incomplete, with Christian and pagan practices blending in syncretic forms that persisted for generations. Viking trade networks extended throughout the known world and connected Scandinavia with distant regions including the Byzantine Empire, the Middle East, Central Asia, and North America. Norse merchants traveled vast distances by sea and land to exchange goods that could not be produced locally, while establishing commercial relationships that brought wealth and exotic materials to Viking territories. Viking trade routes followed established paths that connected major commercial centers through combinations of maritime and overland transportation. The most important routes included the Baltic Sea network, North Sea connections to Western Europe, river systems penetrating into Russia, and the famous Volga route to the Caspian Sea and beyond. Ancient Viking merchant vessels differed from military longships through increased cargo capacity, higher freeboard, and more robust construction that prioritized carrying capacity over speed and maneuverability. Trading ships called nares could transport substantial loads across open ocean while maintaining seaworthiness in challenging conditions. Viking navigation for trade voyages required extensive knowledge of currents, winds, coastal features, and celestial navigation. It enabled merchants to reach distant destinations and return safely with valuable cargoes. Trading voyages could take months or years to complete and exposed participants to numerous hazards. Ancient Viking trade goods exported from Scandinavia included furs, walrus ivory, amber, timber, iron, soapstone vessels, and enslaved people captured during raids or purchased from other sources. These products commanded high prices in foreign markets and provided wealth that supported Viking society. Viking imports brought luxury goods, raw materials, and specialized products from distant regions including silk, spices, wine, glass, silver, weapons, and fine textiles that were unavailable in Scandinavia. Imported goods demonstrated wealth and status while providing materials for local crafts. Ancient Viking precious metal trade involved large quantities of silver obtained through commerce and tribute payments that flowed into Scandinavia from throughout the Viking world. Silver served as currency, raw material for jewelry, and portable wealth that could be divided or combined as needed. Viking market towns developed at strategic locations where merchants gathered to exchange goods, negotiate deals, and access services including lodging, storage, and financial arrangements. Major trading centers like Birka, Hidibi, and Kaupang attracted merchants from throughout the known world. Ancient Viking trading season followed. Favorable weather patterns and typically occurred during summer months when ice-free seas and passable overland routes enabled safe travel. Winter months saw reduced trading activity with merchants returning home or wintering in foreign ports. Viking merchant organization included individual traders, family trading ventures, and larger commercial partnerships that pooled resources and shared risks across multiple voyages. Successful merchants accumulated substantial wealth and gained social status through their commercial activities. Ancient Viking currency systems used silver by weight rather than coined money for most transactions, with merchants carrying scales and weights to verify the value of silver pieces exchanged for goods. This flexible system allowed transactions of any value through division or combination of silver. Viking credit arrangements enabled merchants to obtain goods on delayed payment terms, extending commercial networks beyond immediate cash transactions. Credit relationships required trust and reputation that merchants carefully cultivated through honest dealings and reliable payment. Ancient Viking commercial law governed trading activities through customary rules that defined proper behavior, resolved disputes, and punished fraud or theft. Legal frameworks supported commerce by creating predictable conditions where merchants could operate with reasonable confidence. Viking market security protected merchants, goods, and transactions from theft and violence through arrangements between market operators and local authorities. Market peace regulations prohibited violence during trading periods and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes without disruption. Ancient Viking shipping insurance did not exist in formal terms, but merchants managed risks through diversification of cargoes, shared ownership of vessels and goods, and maintenance of reserves to absorb losses. Risk management was essential for long-term commercial success. Viking trading. Partnerships formed between merchants from different regions who provided local knowledge, warehouse facilities, and commercial connections that enabled foreign traders to operate effectively in unfamiliar markets. Partnership networks created extensive commercial systems. Ancient Viking. Brokerage services connected buyers and sellers, while facilitating transactions through knowledge of market conditions, available goods, and potential trading partners. Brokers earned commissions or fees for their services and provided valuable market. Intelligence. Viking warehouse storage protected valuable goods insecure. Facilities during the periods between purchase and resale, or while awaiting favorable shipping conditions. Proper storage prevented damage and theft while maintaining product quality. Ancient Viking slave trade represented a significant but morally troubling aspect of Viking commerce that involved capturing, purchasing, and selling human beings as property throughout Viking trading networks. Enslaved people were traded to various destinations and served as laborers, concubines, and household servants. Viking fur trade obtained pelts from northern forests through combinations of hunting, trapping, and trading with indigenous peoples who supplied valuable furs, including beaver, marten, fox, and squirrel. Fur processing and grading determined value in distant markets. Ancient Viking amber. Collection gathered fossilized tree resin from Baltic shores where this precious material washed up naturally and could be collected without mining or complex extraction. Amber was highly valued for jewelry and decorative arts. Throughout the ancient world. Viking walrus hunting expeditions traveled to far northern waters, where these marine mammals provided ivory, tusks that substituted for elephant ivory in European markets. Walrus ivory carving created elaborate decorative objects and practical items valued by wealthy patrons. Ancient Viking timber trade exported high-quality wood from Scandinavian forests to regions where suitable timber was scarce or unavailable. Shipbuilding timber was particularly valuable and commanded premium prices in markets throughout Europe. Viking iron production created trade goods from bog iron deposits that were smelted and forged into bars or finished products for export. Scandinavian iron quality varied, but the best products found ready markets in regions lacking good local sources. Ancient Viking textile trade involved both export of Scandinavian woolens and import of fine fabrics, including silk and linen from distant production centers. Textile quality ranged from coarse, everyday materials to luxury fabrics reserved for wealthy consumers. Viking spice imports brought exotic flavorings from the Middle East and Asia, including pepper, cinnamon, and other aromatics that were highly valued in Norse cuisine despite their enormous cost. Spice trade was extremely profitable, but required extensive commercial networks. Ancient Viking wine trade imported grape wine from continental Europe to supplement local mead and ale production. Wine was expensive and primarily consumed by wealthy individuals who could afford imported luxuries. Viking glass imports brought vessels, beads, and raw glass from production centers in the Rhineland and Middle East. Glassworking in Scandinavia transformed imported raw materials into finished products that combined foreign materials with Norse craftsmanship. Ancient Viking weapon trade supplied high-quality swords, spears, and other arms through both import and local production using imported materials. Frankish swords were particularly prized and commanded high prices in Scandinavian markets. Viking women's roles in Norse society encompassed far more responsibilities and autonomy than women in many contemporary cultures. With legal rights, economic power, and social influence that enabled them to manage households, businesses, and property during men's absences. Viking Age women operated within patriarchal structures but possessed significant agency in shaping their lives and communities. Viking household management placed women in charge of domestic operations, including food preparation, textile production, child rearing, and supervision of servants and enslaved people. These responsibilities required organizational skills, technical knowledge, and leadership abilities that made women essential to family survival and prosperity. Ancient Viking textile production represented the most important female craft activity and involved every stage of cloth making from fiber preparation through spinning, weaving, and garment construction. Women's textile work clothed families, produced trade goods, and created wealth that contributed substantially to household economies. Viking spinning transformed processed wool, linen, or other fibers into thread using simple spindles that could be operated while performing other tasks. Skilled spinners produced thread of consistent quality and thickness suitable for specific weaving purposes. Ancient Viking weaving utilized vertical warp-weighted looms that created fabric from spun thread through interlacing perpendicular yarn systems. Looms occupied substantial space in Viking homes and produced cloth of various widths and patterns depending on intended uses. Viking dyeing processes colored textiles using plant-based dyes, including madder for red, woad for blue, and various local plants for yellow, brown, and green shades. Dye preparation and application required knowledge of mordants and techniques that achieved consistent, color-fast results. Ancient Viking garment construction involved cutting fabric, sewing seams, and adding decorative elements that created functional clothing appropriate to weather conditions and social occasions. Women's sewing skills produced everything from everyday work clothes to elaborate ceremonial garments. Viking embroidery enhanced clothing and household textiles through decorative stitching that displayed artistic skill and added value to basic fabrics. Complex embroidery indicated wealth and status while demonstrating the needleworker's abilities. Ancient Viking dairy management involved women in milking livestock, processing milk into various products, and storing dairy goods for family consumption and potential trade. Dairy products provided essential nutrition and represented valuable household production. Viking food preservation fell primarily to women, who prepared supplies that sustained families through winter months when fresh food was unavailable. Preservation techniques included drying, smoking, salting, and fermentation that required skill and careful attention. Ancient Viking brewing and beverage production created ale, mead, and other fermented drinks that were consumed daily and served at feasts. Women's brewing knowledge determined beverage quality and household beverage supplies. Viking child rearing responsibilities included feeding, clothing, educating, and socializing children according to gender-specific expectations and family circumstances. Mothers trained daughters in domestic skills, while fathers taught sons outdoor and martial abilities. Ancient Viking marriage arrangements involved women's families in negotiations about bride prices, dowries, and property rights that accompanied unions between families. Women had some voice in marriage decisions, though family interests typically dominated individual preferences. Viking property rights allowed women to own land, livestock, and movable goods independently of their husbands, providing economic security and leverage within marriages. Women could inherit property from parents and maintain control over their own wealth. Ancient Viking divorce options enabled women to end unsuccessful marriages under certain circumstances and recover their dowries and personal property. Divorce was relatively accessible compared to contemporary European societies that prohibited marital dissolution. Viking widowhood gave women increased independence and control over family resources as they managed estates and raised children without male oversight. Wealthy widows could wield substantial economic and social power in their communities. Ancient Viking business management involved women in running farms, trading operations, and craft workshops either independently or during husbands' absences. Women's business activities contributed significantly to family wealth and community economies. Viking legal standing granted women capacity to testify in legal proceedings, bring lawsuits, and defend their interests in court, though male relatives often represented them. Women's legal rights exceeded those in many contemporary societies. Ancient Viking religious roles included women as priestesses, prophetesses, and practitioners of cider magic who maintained spiritual connections and performed ceremonies. Some women gained considerable influence through religious authority. Viking medical knowledge positioned women as primary healthcare providers who treated illnesses, delivered babies, and cared for injured and sick family members. Women's medical skills combined practical experience with folk remedies and spiritual practices. Ancient Viking elderly care typically fell to women who looked after aging parents and relatives unable to care for themselves. Providing proper care for elderly family members fulfilled important social and religious obligations. Viking slave supervision assigned women responsibility for managing enslaved workers who performed household tasks, agricultural labor, and craft production. Mistresses' treatment of enslaved people varied from harsh exploitation to relatively humane management. Ancient Viking social networking created and maintained relationships with other women through visiting, gift exchanges, and mutual assistance that provided emotional support and practical help during challenges. Women's networks functioned as informal social safety systems. Viking entertainment participation included women in feasts, games, and social gatherings where they conversed, displayed their finery, and contributed to community celebrations. Some women gained reputations as skilled storytellers or musicians. Ancient Viking political influence operated indirectly as women advised husbands and sons, arranged marriages, and used their economic resources to support political objectives. Powerful women could shape political outcomes through strategic use of their positions. Viking education responsibilities placed women in charge of teaching daughters domestic skills, social graces, and cultural knowledge necessary for adult roles. Mothers transmitted women's knowledge across generations through direct instruction and example. Ancient Viking foster relationships involved women hosting children from other families to forge alliances, provide education, and strengthen social networks. Foster mothers developed strong bonds with foster children that created lasting connections between families. Viking conflict resolution engaged women in mediating disputes, counseling restraint, and using social pressure to prevent or end conflicts. Women's peacemaking efforts complemented male honor culture with pragmatic concerns about conflict costs. Ancient Viking mourning customs assigned women prominent roles in funeral preparations, ritual lamentations, and commemorative activities that honored the dead and comforted survivors. Women's emotional expressions provided socially acceptable outlets for grief. Viking storytelling preservation passed oral traditions to new generations through women's narratives about family histories, legends, and cultural values. Women's storytelling maintained cultural continuity and educated children in Norse heritage. Ancient Viking seasonal work patterns concentrated women's labor during harvest, preservation, and textile production periods when urgent tasks required extended hours in coordinated family efforts. Seasonal rhythms structured women's work throughout the year. Viking crafts and artistic traditions produced functional objects that combined practical utility with aesthetic beauty through intricate designs, symbolic imagery, and skilled craftsmanship that reflected Norse cultural values and technical abilities. Viking artisans created works that served daily needs while expressing cultural identity and demonstrating the maker's expertise. Viking wood carving represented one of the most widespread and important craft traditions and transformed timber into everything from simple household utensils to elaborate architectural elements and decorative objects. Wood's abundance in Scandinavia made it the primary material for most Viking crafts and construction. Ancient Viking decorative carving incorporated complex patterns, including geometric designs, interlacing ribbons, stylized animals, and mythological scenes that adorned buildings, furniture, ships, and portable objects. Carving styles evolved over time with distinct regional variations and artistic periods. Viking tool making for woodworking produced axes, adzes, chisels, gouges, and knives that enabled sophisticated carpentry and carving work. Quality tools were essential for producing fine crafts and represented significant investments for artisans. Ancient Viking furniture construction created chairs, benches, tables, beds, and storage chests that furnished Viking homes with functional pieces that often incorporated decorative carving and joinery techniques. Furniture quality varied according to owner wealth and craftsman skill. Viking boat-building craftsmanship created vessels ranging from small fishing boats to massive ocean-going longships through sophisticated understanding of wood properties, hull design, and construction techniques. Boat builders held prestigious positions in Norse society. Ancient Viking barrel and container making produced watertight vessels for storing and transporting liquids, foods, and other goods through cooperage techniques that fitted wooden staves together with metal hoops. Containers were essential for Viking daily life and commerce. Viking musical instrument crafting created lyres, flutes, horns, and drums that provided entertainment and accompanied singing during feasts and social gatherings. Musical instruments demonstrated both technical skill and artistic sensibility. Ancient Viking bone and antler working utilized animal materials to create combs, pins, aiming pieces, tool handles, and decorative objects through carving, drilling, and polishing techniques. Bone and antler provided durable materials suitable for detailed work. Viking comb making represented a specialized craft that produced essential grooming tools from antler or bone through careful splitting, shaping, and tooth cutting. Combs were used daily by all social classes and varied in quality and decoration. Ancient Viking gaming piece production created elaborate sets for board games, including Heffertolf and other strategy games that were popular throughout Viking society. Gaming pieces ranged from simple carved wood to elaborate glass or walrus ivory creations. Viking jewelry making transformed precious metals, amber, glass beads, and other materials into ornamental objects, including arm rings, brooches, pendants, and finger rings that displayed wealth and status while serving functional purposes. Jewelry represented portable wealth and important gifts. Ancient Viking filigree work created intricate, decorative patterns through twisted wire and tiny metal granules that were attached to jewelry surfaces through soldering or mechanical connections. Filigree demonstrated exceptional skill and produced delicate, valuable pieces. Viking enamel work incorporated colored glass materials fused onto metal surfaces to create colorful decorative effects on jewelry and other objects. Enamel techniques required knowledge of glass properties and metal compatibility. Ancient Viking leather working produced shoes, belts, bags, scabbards, and other items from processed animal hides through cutting, sewing, and decorative techniques. Leather crafting supplied essential goods for daily life and specialized purposes. Viking shoe making created footwear appropriate to different activities and weather conditions. Through various construction methods, including simple turn shoes and more complex multi-layer designs, quality footwear was essential for comfort and foot protection. Ancient Viking bag and pouch production provided containers for carrying personal items, tools, and valuables through leather or textile construction with drawstring closures or flap covers. Bags were essential accessories for travel and daily activities. Viking rope and cordage making twisted plant fibers, animal hair, or leather strips into strong lines used for rigging ships, securing loads, and countless other purposes. Rope making required skill to produce consistent, strong cordage. Ancient Viking basket weaving utilized flexible plant materials including willow, birch bark, and roots to create containers for storage, transport, and processing various goods. Basket making provided essential household items through renewable materials. Viking ceramic production created cooking vessels, storage containers, and other pottery items through hand building and firing techniques. Viking pottery was generally utilitarian rather than decorative and served practical household needs. Ancient Viking glass bead making melted and shaped colored glass into decorative beads that were used in jewelry and traded throughout Viking networks. Glassworking required specialized knowledge and equipment to achieve desired colors and forms. Viking runestone carving created memorial monuments through inscription of runic texts and decorative designs on large stones that commemorated deceased individuals and important events. Runestone carving combined literacy, artistic skill, and stone working abilities. Ancient Viking textile arts included various decorative techniques beyond basic weaving, such as tablet weaving for bands and borders, null binding for warm clothing, and specialized pattern weaving. Textile decoration enhanced functional items with aesthetic appeal. Viking embroidery thread production created colored threads for decorative needlework through dyeing and preparation of fine yarns. Thread quality affected embroidery results and demonstrated the worker's attention to detail. Ancient Viking tapestry weaving produced decorative wall hangings that insulated homes while displaying scenes from mythology, history, or daily life. Tapestries represented significant investments of time and materials. Viking sewing and tailoring constructed garments through careful cutting, fitting, and stitching that created comfortable, durable clothing appropriate to Norse climate and activities. Tailoring skills varied from basic functional sewing to elaborate garment construction. Ancient Viking pattern development created templates and methods for producing consistent, well-fitted garments and other sewn items. Pattern knowledge was passed from experienced sewers to learners through demonstration and practice. Viking color coordination in crafts combined dyed materials, natural material colors, and contrasting elements to create visually appealing objects that demonstrated aesthetic sensibility. Color choices reflected both personal preferences and cultural conventions. Ancient Viking quality standards in crafts maintained consistency and reputation through attention to materials, construction methods, and finishing details. Craftsmen who produced reliable, quality work developed reputations that attracted customers and commanded premium prices. Viking apprenticeship in crafts trained new artisans through years of practical experience, working alongside masters who shared technical knowledge and trade secrets. Apprentices gradually developed skills through progressive responsibility for more complex work. Ancient Viking tool maintenance for crafts ensured that implements remained sharp, properly shaped, and functional through regular attention to sharpening, handle replacement, and repair. Proper tool care extended equipment life and maintained work quality. Viking workshop organization arranged workspaces, tools, and materials to facilitate efficient production while maintaining safety and quality standards. Successful workshops balanced productivity with attention to craftsmanship. Ancient Viking material sourcing obtained raw materials through combinations of local gathering, trade, and specialized production that supplied craft workshops. Material quality affected finished product characteristics and value. Viking entertainment and storytelling provided essential recreational activities that relieved the monotony of daily work while preserving cultural traditions, transmitting historical knowledge, and strengthening social bonds within Norse communities. Entertainment took various forms appropriate to different seasons, occasions, and social contexts. Viking oral storytelling represented the primary method of preserving history, mythology, and cultural values before widespread literacy, with skilled storytellers memorizing and reciting lengthy narratives during feasts and social gatherings. Stories entertained audiences while teaching moral lessons and cultural knowledge. Ancient Viking saga recitation presented heroic tales of legendary figures, family histories, and historical events through structured narratives that combined entertainment with cultural education. Sagas could take hours or multiple sessions to complete and captivated audiences. With dramatic plots, Viking poetry composition and recitation followed strict metrical patterns and employed complex literary devices, including kennings and alliteration that demonstrated poetic skill and cultural sophistication. Skilled poets called skalds gained prestige and patronage through their artistic abilities. Ancient Viking riddle games tested wit and knowledge through cryptic questions that required clever interpretation and cultural understanding to solve. Riddles provided intellectual entertainment and demonstrated participants' mental acuity. Viking music performance utilized various instruments and vocal techniques to create entertainment during feasts, ceremonies, and informal gatherings. Musical skills were valued social accomplishments that enhanced celebrations and community bonding. Ancient Viking singing included both solo performances and group participation in songs that ranged from work songs and lullabies to elaborate ceremonial compositions. Singing accompanied many daily activities and special occasions. Viking dancing provided physical entertainment and social interaction during feasts and celebrations through group dances and individual performances. Dancing combined physical activity with musical accompaniment and social bonding. Ancient Viking board games offered strategic entertainment through games including Epitaph, a chess-like strategy game, and various dice games that provided mental challenges and social interaction. Gaming was popular among all social classes. Viking physical contests tested strength, skill, and endurance through competitions including wrestling, swimming, horse racing, and various athletic challenges. Physical competitions provided entertainment while maintaining fitness and establishing social hierarchies. Ancient Viking swimming competitions demonstrated aquatic abilities that were essential survival skills in coastal and riverine environments. Swimming prowess was highly valued and provided both practical benefits and entertainment. Viking horse racing and equestrian displays showcased valuable animals and riding skills through races and demonstrations that entertained spectators while displaying wealth and ability. Horse ownership and riding ability indicated high social status. Ancient Viking hunting expeditions provided both practical food acquisition and recreational entertainment through pursuit of game, animals in forests and mountains. Hunting combined necessary subsistence activities with enjoyable outdoor pursuits. Viking fishing expeditions similarly blended practical food gathering with recreational enjoyment of outdoor activities and the satisfaction of successful catches. Fishing techniques varied from simple hand lines to elaborate net systems. Ancient Viking winter indoor activities included craft projects, tool maintenance, storytelling sessions, and games that occupied long, dark winter months when outdoor work was limited. Indoor entertainment helped communities survive psychological challenges of winter isolation. Viking feast entertainment combined eating, drinking, music, storytelling, and social interaction in elaborate celebrations that could last for days during major festivals and life events. Feasts represented high points of Viking social life. Ancient Viking wedding celebrations included days of feasting, gift exchanges, ritual activities, and entertainment that brought communities together to witness and celebrate marriage unions. Wedding festivities strengthened social bonds and family alliances. Viking funeral ceremonies incorporated entertainment elements including eulogies, recitation of deceased accomplishments, competitive games, and feasting that honored the dead while comforting survivors. Funeral activities celebrated lives while acknowledging loss. Ancient Viking seasonal festivals marked important transitions throughout the year with celebrations that combined religious observances, feasting, and entertainment appropriate to each occasion. Seasonal festivals structured the Viking year and provided regular opportunities for community gathering. Viking children's games introduced young people to adult skills and social relationships through play activities that mimicked adult work and social patterns. Children's play prepared them for future responsibilities while providing entertainment. Ancient Viking toy making created miniature tools, weapons, animals, and other objects that children used in imaginative play. Toys were often simple wooden carvings or fabric dolls, but served important developmental purposes. Viking youth training combined education with entertainment through games and activities that taught necessary skills, including hunting techniques, boat handling, and combat abilities. Learning through play made skill acquisition more enjoyable. Ancient Viking animal training demonstrated human control over horses, dogs, birds, and other animals through patient conditioning and reward systems. Trained animals provided both practical services and entertainment through their abilities. Viking dog training produced animals that assisted with hunting, herding, and guarding activities while providing companionship. Well-trained dogs were valuable assets that enhanced household security and productivity. Ancient Viking falconry and hawk training created hunting partners from birds of prey through careful conditioning and handling. Falconry represented prestigious entertainment that required significant time and resources. Viking shipboard entertainment during long voyages included storytelling, singing, games, and contests that relieved boredom and maintained crew morale during extended periods at sea. Shipboard entertainment was essential for successful voyages. Ancient Viking trading fair entertainment combined commercial activities with social gatherings, athletic contests, and other diversions that made market attendance more enjoyable while facilitating business. Relationships. Viking courtship rituals incorporated entertainment elements, including gift exchanges, poetry composition, and public displays that attracted potential partners and demonstrated desirability. Courtship activities blended serious mate selection with playful interaction. Ancient Viking gift-giving customs strengthened social bonds through exchanges of valuable or meaningful objects that demonstrated generosity and maintained reciprocal relationships. Gift exchanges occurred throughout the year, but intensified during festivals. Viking competitive boasting allowed individuals to publicly proclaim their accomplishments, while challenging others to match or exceed their achievements. Boasting served both entertainment and social hierarchy functions. Ancient Viking memory competitions tested participants' abilities to recite lengthy texts, genealogies, or lists that demonstrated mental capacity and cultural knowledge. Memory skills were highly valued in oral cultures. Viking weather prediction provided both practical information and entertainment through observation of natural signs and folk wisdom that forecast coming conditions. Accurate prediction enhanced reputation and demonstrated special knowledge. Viking evening routines marked the transition from daylight activities to nighttime rest and provided time for families to gather, share meals, engage in indoor activities, and prepare for sleep in the relative safety of their homes. Evening hours allowed Vikings to maintain social bonds while recovering from the physical demands of daily work. Viking sunset observations noted the sun's position and changing light that signaled the approaching end of daylight hours and the need to complete outdoor activities before darkness made work impossible or dangerous. Seasonal variations in sunset timing dramatically affected daily schedules. Ancient Viking evening meal preparation created the day's most substantial food consumption and provided opportunities for families to gather around hearths where cooking fires provided both food and warmth. During cold northern evenings, evening meals included foods that had been prepared throughout the day. Viking indoor lighting utilized oil lamps, tallow candles, and torchlight to extend productive hours beyond sunset while creating warm, flickering illumination that transformed home interiors into cozy spaces. Lighting fuel represented significant household expenses. Ancient Viking fire tending maintained hearth fires that provided heat, light, and cooking capability throughout the night. Someone had to monitor fires to prevent dangerous blazes while ensuring flames never died completely in cold weather. Viking evening conversations allowed family members to share information about daily activities, discuss plans and concerns, and maintain social bonds through regular communication. Conversation topics ranged from practical matters to storytelling and gossip. Ancient Viking evening work continued indoor activities, including textile production, tool maintenance, leather working, and other crafts that could be performed by lamplight. Evening work extended productive hours while providing activities during long winter nights. Viking children's bedtime routines prepared young people for sleep through washing, changing into sleeping garments, and settling into sleeping areas. Parents often told stories or sang to children to help them fall asleep. Ancient Viking evening prayers offered thanks to gods for the day's blessings and requested protection. During vulnerable sleeping hours, when supernatural threats seemed more dangerous, evening prayers maintained proper relationships with divine forces. Viking sleep preparation involved arranging bedding materials, including furs, woolen blankets, and straw-filled mattresses or sleeping platforms that provided insulation from cold floors and protection from drafts. Sleeping comfort affected rest quality and health. Ancient Viking sleeping arrangements varied by social status and family size, with wealthy families occupying separate sleeping chambers, while common people often shared multi-purpose rooms. Privacy was limited in most Viking homes. Viking nighttime security measures included securing doors and windows, banking fires safely, and ensuring that valuable possessions were protected from theft. Some communities maintained night watches to guard against various threats. Ancient Viking nocturnal sounds included wind through trees, animal calls, ocean waves, creaking timbers, and occasional human activities that provided familiar background noise. These sounds could be comforting or concerning, depending on their nature. Viking dream interpretation considered dreams potentially significant communications from gods, ancestors, or supernatural forces that provided warnings, guidance, or prophecies about future events. Disturbing dreams received particular attention. Ancient Viking nightmare responses involved protective rituals, prayers, and magical practices intended to ward off evil influences that caused disturbing dreams. Bad dreams could indicate supernatural threats requiring spiritual countermeasures. Viking sleep positions reflected both comfort preferences and practical considerations, including warmth conservation and space sharing in crowded sleeping areas. People typically slept on their sides in semi-fetal positions. Ancient Viking snoring problems disrupted household sleep and sometimes led to separate sleeping arrangements for particularly loud snorers. Snoring remedies included position changes and various folk treatments. Viking night waking for various purposes, including tending fires, checking livestock, attending to children, or responding to nature's call, interrupted sleep throughout the night. Sleep patterns differed from modern continuous sleep expectations. Ancient Viking elderly sleep patterns often involved earlier bedtimes, more frequent waking, and daytime napping to compensate for less restful nighttime sleep. Older people's sleep needs received accommodation within household routines. Viking infant sleep care involved mothers or nursemaids attending to babies' needs throughout the night, including feeding, changing, and comforting. Infant care significantly disrupted adult sleep patterns. Ancient Viking sick care during night hours required family members to monitor and attend to ill individuals who needed extra attention. Night nursing represented challenging but necessary family obligations. Viking seasonal sleep variations reflected dramatic changes in daylight hours, with very short summer nights barely justifying sleep and extremely long winter nights providing extensive darkness. Sleep patterns adapted to these variations. Ancient Viking winter sleep extended through long dark hours when outdoor work was impossible and indoor activities were limited by lighting constraints. Winter sleep patterns differed dramatically from summer schedules. Viking morning preparation began in pre-dawn darkness. During winter months, when early risers rekindled fires and prepared for the day before sunrise. Morning routines varied seasonally according to daylight availability. Ancient Viking sleep quality affected health, mood, and work capacity, with poor sleep contributing to illness and decreased productivity. Vikings understood the importance of adequate rest, even without modern sleep science. Viking sleeping sickness and disorders affected some individuals who experienced unusual sleep difficulties, including insomnia, excessive sleepiness, or disturbed sleep patterns. Folk medicine offered various remedies for sleep problems. Ancient Viking snoring remedies included position changes, herbal preparations, and magical practices intended to quiet noisy sleepers. Success varied, but treatments demonstrated concern for sleep quality. Viking meditation and relaxation practices helped some individuals achieve restful sleep through mental calming techniques, prayer, and focused breathing. Quiet contemplation aided transition to sleep. Ancient Viking bedtime stories entertained children while helping them fall asleep through familiar narratives that provided comfort and cultural education. Storytelling created bonding opportunities between parents and children. Viking lullabies soothed infants and young children through gentle singing that combined melodic comfort with lyrical content about safety, love, and pleasant dreams. Lullabies were passed through generations. Ancient Viking sleep blessings invoked divine protection during vulnerable sleeping hours through prayers and rituals that requested safety from physical and supernatural threats. Sleep blessings provided psychological comfort. Viking morning awakening occurred naturally with changing light during summer months, but required deliberate effort during dark winter mornings when internal rhythms provided less reliable timing. Morning routines reflected seasonal patterns. Ancient Viking daily cycle completion acknowledged the passage of another day and the continuation of life patterns that connected Vikings with ancestors and descendants through shared rhythms. Daily cycles provided structure and meaning. Viking rest and recovery through sleep enabled continued work and maintained health across lifespans. Sleep represented essential renewal that sustained Viking communities through generations of northern living.